Today we're going to create our very first N8N workflow. This workflow will check the weather every day, and if it's too chilly, it'll send you a text message to wear a sweater. There's a few prerequisites that we're going to assume you already have set up. The first is that you've got N8N up and running, which we do right here. The second is that you have an OpenWeatherMap account, and this is the application that will check to see the temperature that day. And then a Twilio account. The Twilio account is what will allow you to send the text messaging out. And there's a few pieces of information for each. So for the OpenWeatherMap, you've got the API key, and for the Twilio account, you have the account SID, the authorization token, and the phone number. So this workflow has 5 components to it, and each of these components has a different role. So as a quick overview, cron node will have the actual trigger that will start up the workflow. The OpenWeatherMap will go and check the weather. If we'll actually add a little bit of logic to the workflow so that you can tell it where to go when different things happen. Twilio will send the actual text message, and the NoOp Node will do literally nothing. And we'll explain why we do that later on. And this is kind of what we expect the final workflow to look like when we're done. So let's start with the cron node. The cron node is actually a special type of node. And what it does is it will trigger that will allow us to start a workflow based off some sort of external source. So the external source here is the time that is on the system at that moment. So let's just add a cron trigger. So here we've just added the cron time. There's 3 different pieces here that we have to take a look at. The mode, and then based off the mode, changes the hours and the minutes. So we want to run this every day, which is perfect. And this is the hour of the day. So this is the 14th hour. So we want to do it at the 8th hour, according to what we have here, and at 0 minutes. So this is saying every day at 8 a.m. do something. Start the trigger. So a couple little introductory notes here. If this is kind of confusing, and you can do this for any node or even credentials, if you're not really sure what to do, you can always go down to the open documentation, and you'll find one of these at the bottom of every node. And if you click on it, it opens up right into what you want to do. So it's very, very useful there. But fortunately, we have our little guide over here. We don't need to use that at the moment. So we're going to execute this just to see that it does something. And yep, perfect, it runs. No problem. So we're just going to close that. And because this is our trigger, I'm just going to put it over to the side. We actually don't need the start trigger. So we're just going to hide it so it's out of our way and not disturbing us. Now the cron node, because it triggers off time, it's important for it to trigger off the right time zone as well. So we're just going to do a couple of things here. We're going to save this workflow. So this is going to be our check weather workflow. And so now that we've saved it, it opens up another option here called settings. So these are the settings for the workflow itself. So we open up the settings. It gives us a bunch of different bits of information. We're not going to go into these in detail, but if you want, you can hover over and it'll show you what each one of these does. The one that we're going to focus on here is time zone. So this is my time zone that I'm in, but if you are in a different time zone, you can go and maybe right now, because it's winter, we want to be in Hawaiian time zone, you can set it to that. But I'm going to leave it as the default because this is what my system is set at, and it'll always bring up the right time zone. So this way it will trigger at the right time. If I had this set to, say, the Hawaiian time zone, it wouldn't actually trigger at the right time. I would be getting it at the wrong time, and I'd be saying, well, I thought this was going to execute at 8 o'clock, and it executed at a different time. So that's a good little option to remember if you're finding that any of your cron nodes are triggering at the wrong time. So go and double check that and make sure that that's correct. All right, and now that we have the cron node set up properly, we're going to open up the next one. Now, here's a little pro tip for you. If you have a node highlighted, we have this one highlighted here, and you click plus, it will automatically connect the new node that you select to the one that you created. It just saves you one little step. It's not a big deal. It's not a ton of time that it saves, but it does just make it a little bit quicker. So we're going to go to the OpenWeatherMap now. And there's the OpenWeatherMap node. We have a bunch of different options here. So the first one is credentials. Credentials are how a system that you are trying to get information from knows that you are who you say you are. So we're going to use the OpenWeatherMap credentials, which I've already had set up, and let's just take a quick look at those. So in the OpenWeatherMap credentials, it's got the credentials name, and I just called it OpenWeatherMap credentials. You can call it anything you want. You can call it Fred, and it'll work just fine. It's just a matter of giving it a name that will mean something to you and that you can recognize. Now the access token here is important. This is just a string of characters and numbers that will represent who you are, and you've gathered this from the OpenWeatherMap, account. And so this allows you to send information and receive information from that service that will allow you to gather that information properly without it having to ask you in real time who you are. So we're just going to save that. So a few other things that it wants us to set up here. So we've got the current weather, which is good. Everything's coming in metric. We're going to go by city name. So by default, because NNN is based out of Berlin, Germany, they have Berlin as their city. But I don't live in Berlin. I live in Edmonton, Alberta. And so I put Edmonton in here. So we're going to test this node. We're just going to execute it. And there's a whole bunch of information that comes up in table format. And you can kind of browse back and forth to see that. I prefer in JSON mode. That's just the way I work. I work up top down. And this is giving me a good sense for what's going on. So it's, minus 1.21 outside, feels like minus 0.4, which, believe it or not, in Edmonton in November is a balmy day. It is extremely warm here today. So we've got all the information we need. Wonderful. We can now close this node up. And you'll see that it automatically connected it, like I indicated before. So the next node that we're going to take a look at is the if node. And the if node is actually a very powerful node. It allows us to make decisions around the information that it receives. So let's just add that if node in here. And even before we go into the data, I'm just going to show you the if node. And it's a little bit different. You'll notice that our other two nodes have these single outputs. So the dots are always an output and the squares are always an input. I guess that's a rectangle, not a square. So the output here, there's two of them. We've got a true and a false output, whereas these just have a 1. So when you have a single output, this tells you that whatever processing, whatever it does, whatever it pulls in here in the node, it outputs just one bit of information. But this one branches off. So what this says is, depending upon what processing you do inside the node, if it is determined that yes, that occurred correctly, it'll send it out to this output. If it says that it didn't come in correctly, it'll send it out this input or output. Sorry. So it's very important that we know, what we want to do if this is correct and what we want to do if it's not correct. So we'll keep that in mind as we're working through our if node. So when we get into the if node, we've just got the basic setup here right now. So what it's doing is it's going to be comparing information that it has and deciding, hey, is this right or not? So based off what we have in our documentation here, our if node, we're going to add a condition. And we have 3 different kinds of conditions. So a Boolean, which is a yes, no, true, false, 0 or 1, number, which is just a standard number, and a string, which is just a series of characters. So we're going to be dealing with numbers here, because we're going to be checking what the temperature feels like. So we've got different values in here. So in here, for example, we can put in a value of anything we want. We can put in, because we're looking at numbers, we can put in a value of, let's say, 28. And if we were to run this, it'll say that there's no text data, but our output is true because it ran and just did something. But what we want to do here is a little bit different. We want to go into this variable, and we want this to be dynamic, because right now this is just static. It doesn't change depending upon what we do. So every single one of these different fields here, you see has this little cog. And what this cog allows us to do is dynamically apply information to this field. So we're going to add an expression. And this brings up our expression editor. So you can see here that we've got the 28 that we put in before. We're not going to use this. We're actually going to be pulling information from the OpenWeatherMap node, because that's what we're going to be comparing. So you'll see as it's walking us through here on the web page, we can go to nodes. We can go to the OpenWeatherMap node, and we're going to put the output data. So it's the information that is done once it's processed. So we're going to output that data. Always comes up as JSON because it's JSON data that we're going to be pulling in. And then we're starting to see some stuff that looks familiar. We've got our cloud, our coordinates, a bunch of different information here. We're going to be going to the main section here, and feels like, which is what we had before. And when we click on here, it automatically builds out our expression. And so if we read through the expression, it says, the OpenWeatherMap node, the JSON main piece of information, and feels like. We want to pull that information out. And down here, we see the result. So when this is being executed, this is the output that we're going to get based off the information now. If the weather changes, so the next time it runs, because this is going to run every day, if it changes, then it will reevaluate what this expression is and give you that output. So if we just close this, and you'll notice it automatically puts in that value. The operation is the next piece that we have to take a look at. So we can leave it the way it is right now because this is actually the one that we want. But this will give you the option as to how to compare them. So basically right now this is saying, when we have smaller selected, if the value here is smaller than the value here, then execute it. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that if the temperature is below 18 degrees Celsius, right now it's saying if our temperature is below 0 degrees Celsius, which is a little bit too chilly, we want to be wearing a sweater before that. So we're just going to change that to 18. So you see the difference here where we've got the dynamic information. It changes the view of or the formatting of this field. So this field will be dotted with the pinkish or reddish background. Whereas here we don't have any outline at all, and it's just standard gray. So we know that this is dynamic, and if we go under here, we've got different values than if we go under the gears here. So this does not have an expression with it right now. So this is more or less what we're trying to find here. So this is saying when this dynamic value, which right now is -3, is smaller than this value, which is 18, then yes, this will be true. So let's execute this and make sure that this works the way we want. And it does. You notice that the output goes to true, and it actually pulls all the information in from the previous node. This is really beneficial because it allows data to travel through nodes even as it's being processed, and you can control it. And we just confirm that yes, it's -3.97, and so because -3.97 is less than 18, we're true. So wonderful. So this one's working great. So that's saying that would have gone out the true node. So great, it's true. Now what do we do with it? Well, this is where the Twilio node comes in. So for those of you who don't know, Twilio is a service that lets you send text messaging, lets you send even work with voicemail and voice as well, and all controlled via the API. So here we have the interface for the Twilio node. Again, much like the OpenWeatherMap node, and you'll see this is very common, that almost every service like this has some sort of credentials that you need to set up. You need to have an account set up, and it needs to know who you are. So we're just going to use the Twilio credentials, and you'll see here they're a little bit different than the OpenWeatherMap credentials that we had. We've actually got 2 bits of information. We've got the account SID, and we've got the authorization token, and that information is available to the Twilio node so that it can talk with the Twilio service. And again, if you're not sure how to deal with credentials, right here, you can click on that and that'll pop up information for you. So we're going to leave these 2 settings as they are, as they're basically the only settings that we've got. The from, we've already got this, we've pulled it from our Twilio account. So we're just going to paste it in here. Again, I apologize. We have to blur this out, but that is that's the way this works. So I would also like to mention that if you're on a trial account for Twilio, you can only enter a registered or a verified phone number in the to field here. So I need to give my own personal phone number here. Otherwise, it will not work. It'll fail. So I put my number in here then. Wonderful. And then we'll click off it, and you'll notice. So anything actually that you see here with these red triangles, that means that before we can run this workflow, we need to make sure that these are cleared up. Because even if we're outside of here and try to run the workflow, we're going to get an error. And in fact, I can even quickly demonstrate that. You see here, it says that we've got an error. So if I were to try to execute this node, we get the error down here. And it tells you exactly, it's very helpful, it tells you where exactly the error is. And you can see here that the error is in here. And when you click into here, you see right here's where the error is. So if you follow the red triangles, it'll take you, in general, right to where you need to be in order to fix the problem. So here we are with the message. We're going to add an expression here as well, because we want this to be kind of dynamic, give us a little bit of information. So we've got in here the option to go and just grab what we have here for the data. So this automatically allows us to copy and paste in an expression, which is kind of neat because that way we can easily share these expressions and share what information shows up here. So this shows you that you don't necessarily, just like in the previous node, put in specific information that related to only the dynamic information. You can format this and make this work any way you want. So, for example, if I were to build this out manually, I would go to my nodes, I would go to my OpenWeatherMap nodes, my output data, JSON, main, and there's my fields like. Gives us the exact same information that we had here, as you can see. But I just manually went and found it through there. And then I could easily put this to say the exact same thing here. So if I were to type in here, wear a sweater today, it is such, and of course the degree symbol is always hard to do, so I'm just going to cheat and copy it. And so as you can see, we can manually reproduce that as well. Or we can change it to whatever we want. You can say something like, let's see, even put my typo in there. You can even go in here and say, it's a tad chilly at 0 degrees Celsius. You may want to grab a sweater. So again, you can make it say and do whatever you want on your own. So we'll leave it our own little custom one here. And so if we execute this node, again, here's all the output data. So as you see, this information is just specific to the Twilio node. So a little side note here, there's a couple of different things around some of the nodes. So some of them will transfer the data through, and some will not. So as we saw earlier, the the OpenWeatherMap node and the if node, they will transfer the information through, but the Twilio node does not. And actually, one of the other nodes, the set node, you get to choose whether it will transfer the information through or not. So just a little something to keep in mind. So this all ran properly, but let's make sure that it actually got through. So here's my phone, and this is my little account where it pulls information from Twilio. You see that I've already before said hello from N8N from the Twilio account. So when we run this, we hit execute. And this comes up nice and clear. And then you will see, there it is, sent from the Twilio trial account. And this is the exact wording that we had put out before. And this is so proving that, hey, this works perfectly fine. So we're just going to pop that up over there. Just going to minimize that again. So the last one that we're going to do is the NoOp node. And so the NoOp node, like I was saying before, is a little bit funny. And when I first saw it, I'm like, why in the world would we do this? This is a node that literally does nothing. Absolutely nothing at all, other than it exists. So the NoOp node actually has a couple of purposes. Not with the actual workflow when it runs on its own or running as a service. It's very useful for a couple of reasons, especially when you're developing. So this tells me a couple of things. One, it tells me that I've actually dealt with this and it's not something that's waiting to be done in the future. It's complete. You can also use it to help you troubleshoot. So this tells me, the little ones here tell me, hey, each one of these nodes has executed a single time, but this one has not. So that's confirming that this is true and this works properly. If it were false, this would show a 1 on it. The third thing that actually just came up the other day that I found is under settings. You can use this to make comments. So this would have fired if it were false, for example. And we just say to display it in the flow. And there's our little comment, which is really useful. Anybody who's done any development knows that comments will save your bacon later on, because I guarantee you 3 months from now you're going to come back to this node and go, what did that node do again? I haven't a clue, but you can take a look at your NoOp node and the comment and go, oh yeah, that's right, that's what that does. So very, very helpful from that perspective. A couple little tips here. When you're done creating your workflow, before you try to execute it or anything along those lines, make sure you save. Saving is very, very important. The other piece is that while this is set up now and working, we've tested it a little bit, it actually doesn't work yet. We haven't actually activated it, and that's the key. This needs to be activated right up here. And when you activate this, just, as we said before, you should be saving it, but this will automatically save it for you. So yes, activate and save. So now it will run in the background every day at 8 a.m. my time, in my time zone. This will execute and check the weather, and if it's too chilly outside, it'll send me a text message. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully there was something that you found useful, and we've got another one of these coming up in the near future. Thanks a lot.